The morning sun slanted through the pink curtains of 5-year-old Emily's bedroom. Her father, Jack, leaned against the doorframe, an amused smile on his face as he watched his precocious daughter carefully brush her dark hair in front of the heart-shaped mirror. "Almost ready for school, Pumpkin?" he asked. Emily met his eyes in the reflection, her expression adorably serious. "Just about, Daddy. I want to look my best." Jack chuckled. That was his Emily, always putting her best foot forward, wise beyond her years. Her preschool teacher, Mrs. Allen, often remarked that in her decades of teaching, she'd never encountered a child quite like her. "Did you know that Lily started reading chapter books?" Emily said as she placed her hairbrush on the white wooden vanity. "I think I'd like to try reading one too." "Is that so? Well, we can stop by the library after school and pick one out together." Emily's face lit up. "I would love that. Thank you, Daddy." She hurried over and hugged him tightly around the waist. Jack's heart warmed as he smoothed her hair. What had he done to deserve such a sweet, special little girl? Downstairs, he could hear his wife Sarah putting breakfast on the table. He hoped some food and coffee would ease the weariness from another long week at the office. All he wanted was a quiet weekend with his family. But as soon as Jack settled into his chair at the kitchen table, Emily hopped up beside him, her green eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Daddy, I've been thinking," she began in her high, earnest voice. "Where do people go when they die? Mrs. Allen said they go to heaven. But my friend Ava said there's no proof of that. She thinks people just disappear forever. But that can't be right, can it?" Jack set down his coffee mug and looked to Sarah for support, but she just raised her eyebrows as if to say, "She's your daughter before 8 a.m. He sighed. There went his quiet morning. Somehow, even at the age of 5, Emily always drew him into these deep conversations and debates. Her profound questions never ceased to amaze him. "Well, Pumpkin, I think," he began, choosing his words carefully, as he attempted to explain the nuances of life after death in terms a kindergartner could understand. He caught Sarah looking at Emily with a mix of marvel and concern. Later, as he rinsed the breakfast dishes, Sarah came up beside him and lowered her voice. "Don't you think it's a little strange, the way Emily thinks and talks?" she asked. "I mean, what normal 5-year-old contemplates the afterlife?" "She's not a normal 5-year-old, Jack replied with a hint of pride. "She's exceptional." "I know, but sometimes I worry. Is it healthy for her to be so serious all the time? So ahead of her peers?" Jack put an arm around his wife's shoulders. "I think Emily is exactly who she's meant to be. Let's nurture that. She'll be fine." Sarah rested her head against his chest. "I hope you're right." A few minutes later, Emily skipped into the kitchen with her purple backpack. "I'm ready." "All right, Pumpkin, let's get you to school." Jack grabbed his keys, gave Sarah a quick kiss, and headed out to the car with his daughter. As he navigated the morning traffic, his mind wandered to the strange distance he'd sensed from Sarah lately. She seemed on edge, almost scared, and avoided his eyes, as if she were hiding something. It was so unlike her. They'd always been open books with each other, ever since they started dating in college. It stirred up unsettling memories of his parents and their deeply dysfunctional marriage. The fights, the icy silences, the constant tension simmering beneath the surface. In the end, his father's abuse and his mother's unhappiness had torn the family apart. The last thing Jack wanted was to repeat their mistakes. He shook off the uneasy feeling as he pulled up to the Sunshine Daycare Center. Emily was already unbuckling herself, eager to start the day. "Bye, Daddy, love you!" She hopped out and started to skip away. "Wait, Emily!" Jack called. She turned, pigtails swishing. "Yes? Be good today, okay? No more trying to make things fair by pushing other kids around." Emily frowned, looking uncannily like her mother when presented with an unpleasant truth. "But Daddy, it's not fair that Danny hit Ava yesterday. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind." "Whoa there, Punisher," Jack chuckled. "Let Mrs. Allen handle Danny, okay? You're not the playground police." "Fine," Emily sighed. "I'll be good. But if he does it again? Then you tell a teacher. No vigilante justice, little miss. Capiche?" "Capiche," she grumbled. Mrs. Allen, a plump woman with kind eyes, approached them with a smile. "Good morning, Emily, Mr. Spencer. Planning to take on the world again today, are we? Always, Mrs. Allen, Emily replied cheerfully. Then she glanced back at her father. Don't worry, Daddy, I'll be nice, even to Danny. Jack and Mrs. Allen shared an amused, exasperated look as Emily marched determinedly through the colorful doors. She sure is something, Mrs. Allen said. Feisty little girl you've got there. That she is, Jack agreed. But hopefully not too feisty. Let me know if she stirs up any more trouble. Will do. Have a good day, Mr. Spencer. Jack waved goodbye, wondering what his elusive little avenger would get up to today. If one thing was certain with Emily, it was that nothing was ever boring. Give it back! The piercing shriek jolted Mrs. Allen from her reverie. She looked up from the attendance sheet to see Emily grappling with Danny over a blue truck in the middle of the playroom. The little boy's face was red as he tried to wrench the toy from Emily's grasp. Emily! Danny! What's going on here? Mrs. Allen demanded, hurrying over to the feuding children. Danny hit Ava with this truck yesterday, and now he's trying to do it again, Emily said angrily. I'm stopping him. Nuh-uh, Danny protested. I wasn't going to hit her. Ava, tell her. Ava, who had been coloring quietly in the corner, looked up with an anxious expression. I don't want to get involved. Mrs. Allen held up her hands. All right, enough. Emily, we talked about this. It's not your job to police the other children. And Danny, we keep our hands to ourselves, remember? If you can't play nicely with the truck, you won't play with it at all. But Mrs. Allen, Emily began. No buts, the teacher said firmly. She reached for the toy. Now give me the truck. You two need a break from each other. Emily, why don't you go read a book, and Danny? But as she spoke, Danny suddenly lashed out, smacking Emily's hand with the truck in a final effort to gain possession. Emily recoiled with a yelp, inadvertently knocking the truck into her own face. Instantly, blood began to trickle from her nose. Oh my goodness! Emily, are you okay? Mrs. Allen grabbed some tissues and rushed to stem the bleeding, glaring at a now guilty-looking Danny. Daniel Mitchell, that was completely unacceptable. Go sit in the quiet corner and put your head down. We'll be discussing this with your parents later. As Danny slunk away, Mrs. Allen gently examined Emily's nose. The little girl was clearly fighting back tears, her bottom lip trembling. Is it broken? Emily asked in a wobbly voice. Am I going to look ugly now? Oh, sweetie, no, Mrs. Allen soothed. It's not broken, just a little banged up. You could never look ugly. But let's go see the nurse and get you cleaned up, okay? Emily nodded miserably and allowed herself to be led out of the chaotic playroom. Mrs. Allen's heart ached for her. For all her toughness and bravado, Emily was still just a little girl who wanted to be liked and accepted. In the narrow hallway, they nearly collided with an unfamiliar young woman in bright scrubs. Oh, excuse me, the woman said with a startled smile. She had a sweet, pretty face framed by chin-length blonde hair. I don't think we've met. I'm Veronica, the new nurse. I'm Diane Allen, Mrs. Allen replied. Wonderful to have you here, Veronica. I was just bringing Emily to your office, actually. She had a little scuffle and bumped her nose. Veronica crouched down to Emily's level, her blue eyes warm with concern. Oh, no. Well, let's get you fixed up, okay, honey? I've got Paw Patrol Band-Aids with your name on them. But Emily was staring at Veronica with a strange intensity, her injury momentarily forgotten. I know you, she said slowly. Veronica blinked. You do? I'm sorry, sweetie, I don't think we've met before. Yes, we have, Emily insisted. My daddy has your picture. Mrs. Allen and Veronica exchanged a confused look. Emily, I really don't think, Mrs. Allen began, but Emily cut her off. In his wallet. He looks at it when he thinks I'm not paying attention, but it's you. I'm sure of it. An uncomfortable silence descended. Mrs. Allen cleared her throat awkwardly. I'm sure there's some misunderstanding, she said with a forced laugh. Now let's get you to the nurse's office and put some ice on that nose, Emily allowed herself to be ushered away, but she kept glancing back at an unsettled-looking Veronica until they rounded the corner. Mrs. Allen felt a strange unease as she replayed the odd interaction in her mind. What could Emily possibly have meant? Surely it was just the wild imagination of a child. But then why had she seemed so certain? Putting the thought aside, Mrs. Allen focused on getting her wounded little warrior patched up and back to rights. There would be time to unravel this curious mystery later. Sarah pulled into the Sunshine Daycare Center parking lot, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. An uneasy feeling had plagued her all day, impossible to shake. She spotted Emily waiting on the colorful playground and felt her heart lift. Her little girl always had a way of brightening her mood even on the toughest days. But as she got closer, Sarah noticed a square of gauze taped across Emily's nose. "Hi, sweetie," she called, trying to keep her tone light. "What happened to your nose?" "Danny hit me with a truck," Emily said matter-of-factly. "But I'm okay, the new nurse fixed me up." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," Sarah said, crouching down to examine her daughter's face with concern. "We'll have a talk with Mrs. Allen about Danny's behavior." As if on cue, the stout, kind-faced teacher approached them at the gate. But instead of her usual cheery smile, Mrs. Allen wore an odd, almost uncomfortable expression. "Mrs. Spencer, could I speak with you for a moment?" she asked, her eyes darting between Sarah and Emily. A tendril of dread unfurled in Sarah's stomach. "Of course. Emily, why don't you go play on the swings for a minute?" She waited until her daughter was out of earshot before turning to Mrs. Allen with forced calm. "Is everything okay? Besides Emily's injury, I mean." Mrs. Allen hesitated. "Yes, well, Emily said something a bit strange earlier when I was taking her to the nurse. She claimed that her father has a picture of our new nurse, Veronica, in his wallet, that he looks at it when he thinks Emily isn't watching." Sarah stared at her. "What? That's ridiculous. Why would Jack have a picture of the daycare nurse?" "I agree, it's very odd," Mrs. Allen said carefully. "I assumed Emily must be confused or perhaps imagining things, but she was quite insistent." A cold, sinking feeling washed through Sarah, but she schooled her features into a neutral mask. "I'm sure that's all it is. Emily's imagination running wild. You know how fanciful kids can be at this age." Mrs. Allen nodded, but she still looked troubled. "Yes, of course. I just thought you should be aware, in case— Well, I'm sure it's nothing. Forget I mentioned it." Sarah forced a smile. "Already forgotten. Thank you for telling me." She made her way over to the playground on wooden legs, her mind spinning. It had to be a coincidence, a childish misunderstanding. Her husband would never. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Emily asked, looking up at her with those uncanny green eyes that missed nothing. "You look worried." Sarah quickly rearranged her expression. "Nothing's wrong, sweetie. Mommy's just a little tired." She took Emily's hand, desperate suddenly to be away from this place and the troubling seed that had just been planted. "Come on, let's go home." As they walked toward the parking lot, a young woman in bright scrubs exited the building and headed for a blue sedan. The early evening light illuminated her blonde hair and fresh-faced beauty. Sarah's stomach lurched as Emily pointed at her excitedly. "Look, Mommy, that's Veronica, the nurse I was telling you about." Sarah looked, really looked, at the woman who had captivated her daughter's attention. She was young, mid-20s at most, and undeniably pretty. Exactly the type of vivacious blonde that men like Jack always seemed to go for. Sarah's free hand unconsciously rose to touch her own face, tracing the faint lines that had appeared seemingly overnight. When had she gotten so old? When had her hair lost its shine, her skin its firmness and glow? Suddenly, Sarah felt every one of her 38 years weighing on her like lead. Next to this nubile young nurse, what chance did she have of holding her husband's interest? No wonder he carried another woman's picture, gazing at it in secret, pining for someone untouched by the ravages of age and motherhood. "Mommy," Emily's voice cut into her spiraling insecurity. "Can we go? I'm hungry." Sarah tore her gaze away from Veronica's departing form, blinking back the hot sting of tears. "Of course, sweetie," she said hollowly. "Let's go home." But even as she said it, Sarah knew nothing would be the same. The tiny fissure of doubt and fear inside her had cracked wide open, threatening to crumble everything she thought was stable and sure. As they drove away, Sarah gripped the steering wheel like a lifeline, fighting the rising tide of dread. Somehow she had to confront this. She had to know the truth about her husband and the mysterious young woman whose face he supposedly treasured. even if learning that truth destroyed her. Jack could sense that something was off as soon as he walked through the front door after a long day at the office. The house was too quiet, the atmosphere heavy with an unspoken tension. "Sarah? Emily? I'm home," he called, setting his briefcase down in the foyer. Silence. Then the creak of floorboards as Sarah emerged from the kitchen, her green eyes stormy and rimmed with red. "Hey," Jack said carefully. "Everything okay? Where's Emily?" "At Lily's for a sleepover," Sarah replied, her voice tight. "We need to talk." A sinking feeling settled in Jack's gut. Nothing good ever followed those 4 ominous words. Okay," he said warily. "What's going on? Did something happen?" Sarah crossed her arms, hugging herself as if for protection. "You tell me, Jack. Is there something you want to confess? Something you've been hiding from me?" Jack's mind raced, trying to decipher his wife's cryptic accusations. "Hiding? Sarah, what are you talking about? I'm not hiding anything." She let out a brittle laugh, shaking her head. "Really? Because that's not what I heard. Emily seems to think you have a picture of the new daycare nurse hidden in your wallet. A picture you take out and look at when you think no one's watching. Care to explain that?" Jack stared at her, utterly baffled. "The daycare nurse? Sarah, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't have pictures of anyone but our family in my wallet." "Don't lie to me," Sarah hissed, her eyes welling with fresh tears. "I saw her, Jack. I saw Veronica. She's young and beautiful and everything I'm not anymore. Is that why you're sneaking around behind my back? Because I'm not enough for you now?" Jack's mouth fell open in shock. "What? No. Sarah, I swear to you, I have never even met this woman. I don't know what Emily thinks she saw, but it's not true. There's no one else. There could never be anyone else. I love you." He reached for her, but Sarah jerked away, as if his touch burned. "Don't," she said brokenly. "Don't touch me. Don't tell me you love me when you're fantasizing about a woman half my age. I can't do this anymore, Jack." Tears were now streaming down her face, but her expression hardened with resolve. Jack felt his stomach drop to his knees as he realized what was coming. "Sarah, please," he begged. "Don't do this. It's not what you think, I promise you." "I want a divorce," Sarah interrupted, her voice leaden with finality. "I'll have the papers drawn up in the morning. I think you should sleep at your office tonight. I need some time to process this." "Sarah, please just go." She turned away, folding in on herself like a wilted flower, and Jack understood that nothing he said would penetrate her impenetrable wall of hurt and betrayal. Not tonight. Wordlessly, he gathered up his briefcase and trudged to the door, his mind spinning with confusion and despair. How had things unraveled so quickly? How could a simple childhood misunderstanding destroy his marriage in the blink of an eye? As the door clicked shut behind him, an awful thought occurred to Jack. Maybe this wasn't really about Veronica or Emily's wild story. Maybe Sarah had been looking for an excuse, a way out, and this was the perfect opportunity to cut and run. But why? What had he done to drive his wife away? He loved Sarah and Emily more than anything in this world. The idea that Sarah had been secretly unhappy, secretly longing to escape their life together, it gutted him. Numbly, Jack drove to his office building and let himself in with his keycard. His desk was still littered with papers from that afternoon's mergers and acquisitions meeting, a mess he couldn't stand to look at now. Instead, he collapsed onto the small leather couch in the corner, not bothering to remove his shoes or suit jacket. He stared up at the dark ceiling and tried to calm his racing thoughts, but peace eluded him. All night, one question played on an endless, agonizing loop in his exhausted mind. What was he going to do now? The next morning, Jack arrived at the Sunshine Daycare Center, just as the first tiny, tottering students began to file inside. His rumpled suit and bloodshot eyes earned him a few curious looks from the other parents, but he barely noticed. He had a single-minded focus: to get to the bottom of this disastrous misunderstanding. He spotted Mrs. Allen welcoming her young charges at the front entrance and hurried over to her. "Mrs. Allen," he called, "could I speak with you for a moment? It's urgent." The plump, grandmotherly teacher turned to him with a slight frown. "Of course, Mr. Spencer. Is everything all right? Where's Emily?" "She's with her mother," Jack said tersely. who I'm apparently divorcing, thanks to some crazy story Emily told about me having a picture of the new nurse. Mrs. Allen's eyes widened. Oh my, Mr. Spencer, I'm so sorry. When Emily mentioned it yesterday, I never imagined. She trailed off, looking distraught. Jack scrubbed a hand over his stubbled jaw. I need to talk to this Veronica. I have to clear this up before it destroys my family. Of course, Mrs. Allen said quickly. Let me just get Miss Johnson to watch the children, and I'll take you to her office. Poor thing, she must be so confused. A few minutes later, Jack found himself standing awkwardly in a small, brightly decorated nurse's office. Veronica sat behind her desk, looking wary and uncomfortable. Mr. Spencer, she said carefully, how can I help you? Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm his frayed nerves. Veronica, I'm sorry to barge in on you like this, but I need to know what's going on. My daughter seems to think I have a secret picture of you, and now my wife is threatening to leave me over it. Veronica's delicate brow furrowed. A picture of me? But that's impossible. We've never even met before. I know, Jack said desperately. Believe me, I'm just as confused as you are. Emily insists I have your photo in my wallet, but it's just not true. The only pictures I carry are of Sarah and Emily. He reached into his back pocket and produced his weathered leather billfold. Veronica watched warily as he flipped it open and carefully extracted a small, yellowed photograph from behind Emily's most recent school portrait. This is the only other photo in here, Jack said, holding it out to her. It's my mother. She passed away when I was a teenager. Veronica reached out to take the fragile photo, and as her eyes fell on the woman's face, she let out a sharp gasp. Oh my God, she whispered. That's my mother. But how? Jack's head snapped up, his heart pounding. What? Veronica met his shocked gaze, her blue eyes huge with astonishment. This is my mother, Victoria, but she died before I was born. My father always said I looked just like her. Understanding slammed into Jack like a freight train. Your mother's name was Victoria? And your father? Richard, Veronica said softly. Richard O'Connell. Jack felt the world tilt on its axis as the pieces fell into sickening place. Richard O'Connell, his mother's second husband. The man she'd married in secret when Jack was just a boy, before whisking off to start a new life without him. I can't believe this, Jack said hoarsely. All these years I never knew. Veronica reached out to grip his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. We're family, she said wonderingly. I have a brother. Mrs. Allen watched the stunning reunion with joyful tears in her eyes. Brother and sister, separated by a cruel twist of fate, yet brought together again by a child's innocent observation. It was like something out of a storybook. Jack knew he should be reeling from this life-altering revelation, but in that moment, all he could think about was Sarah. He needed to go to her immediately, to explain everything and beg her forgiveness. He couldn't lose his wife, not when they'd already lost so much precious time to secrets and misunderstandings. He squeezed Veronica's hand, then released it and stood up. I'm so sorry, but I have to go. I have to talk to Sarah before this goes any further. But I want to know everything about you, about our family. Can we meet later? Tonight? Veronica nodded quickly. Yes, of course. I need to process this too. We'll talk then. With a parting smile of gratitude to a misty-eyed Mrs. Allen, Jack hurried out of the office as if hellhounds were on his heels. He had to get to Sarah before it was too late. He had already gained one sister. He couldn't bear to lose the other half of his heart in the process. 6 months later, Jack paced the gleaming linoleum floor of Mercy General Hospital's maternity ward, his stomach in knots. He couldn't remember ever being this scared, this exhilarated, this completely off balance. Not even when he'd stood outside Sarah's lawyer's office 6 months ago, divorce papers in hand, preparing to lay his heart at her feet one last desperate time. He still marveled at the fact that she had chosen him, chosen their family, even after everything they'd been through. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of apologies, long overdue conversations, and tearful reconciliations as he and Sarah worked to stitch their tattered marriage back together again. Emily had been over the moon when Daddy moved back home, though she was still adjusting to her new Aunt Veronica's presence in their lives. It boggled Jack's mind that his little girl had accidentally discovered a branch of their family tree that he'd never even known existed. More proof that Emily was one in a million. The past few months had been a journey of rediscovery for him and Veronica as well. Slowly, through late-night conversations over coffee and poring over old photos, they had begun to fill in the blanks of their mother's history and their intertwined roots. It was surreal and wonderful and bittersweet all at once. Now, Veronica sat calmly in a waiting room chair, watching her newfound brother wear a groove in the floor. "You're going to pass out if you don't breathe," she observed wryly. "I promise. Sarah's in good hands. Women have babies every day." "I know that," Jack muttered. "Doesn't make it any less terrifying. I thought I'd be an old pro at this the second time around, but I think I'm more worked up now than when Emily was born." Veronica raised an eyebrow. "Probably because now you know exactly what to expect. The freaky Twilight Zone birth canal, the stitches, the—" "Please stop," Jack groaned. "I'm already fighting the urge to bust in there and yank my wife out before the spawn of Satan rips her to shreds." Veronica snorted. "Wow. I really hope you're planning to clean up that attitude before you see your new sons for the first time." "Sons?" Jack asked absent-mindedly. Then his head snapped up as his sister-in-law's words registered. "Wait, how did you know it was a boy's?" Too late, he saw the "oh shit" expression flash across Veronica's face. She bit her lip guiltily. Lucky guess?" "V," Jack warned. "Did Sarah tell you something that I don't know?" Veronica squirmed in her seat. "Well, not exactly. It's just, when she had her last ultrasound, the doctor thought he might have seen—" "You know what? Forget it. I'm sure it's nothing." She smiled brightly, fooling absolutely no one. Jack opened his mouth to unleash a barrage of questions, but just then, the double doors to the delivery ward swung open. A nurse in pink scrubs emerged, her face wreathed in smiles. Jack's heart leapt into his throat. This was it, the moment of truth. "Mr. Spencer?" the nurse called. "That's me," Jack croaked, raising a shaky hand. "Is my wife—" "Your wife is doing splendidly," the nurse assured him. "Congratulations, Dad. You have 2 healthy baby boys." The world seemed to tilt and spin around him. Jack gripped the back of a chair, certain he had misheard. "2?" he whispered. "Did you say—" The nurse grinned. "That's right, twins. They're a little small, but that's to be expected. You can come back and see them now." Jack turned to Veronica, his eyes huge with shock. She jumped up and threw her arms around him, laughing with delight. "Oh my God, Jack, did you hear that? Twins! And boys, just like I accidentally ruined the surprise about 30 seconds ago." Jack hugged her back reflexively, his mind whirling. Twins. 2 boys. He was a father of 3 now. How had this happened? Dimly, he registered Veronica pulling back and giving him a little shove toward the delivery ward doors. "Go," she urged, her eyes misty. "Go kiss your incredible wife and meet your sons." Jack nodded dumbly, still reeling as he followed the beaming nurse through the swinging doors. The bright lights and antiseptic smell barely registered as he walked down the hallway in a daze. In what felt like seconds and a lifetime, he was standing outside room 2187, staring at the small placard that read Sarah Spencer in neat black letters. His heart felt like it might pound right out of his chest. Slowly, he pushed open the door and stepped inside the dimly lit room. And there was Sarah, looking exhausted and radiant as she cradled 2 impossibly tiny blanket-wrapped bundles close to her chest. She looked up and met his shell-shocked gaze, a beatific smile on her face. "Hey, Dad," she whispered. "Come meet your boys." Drawn forward as if by a magnet, Jack approached the bed and sank down on the mattress beside his wife. Up close, he could see the downy heads and scrunched pink faces of his newborn sons as they nestled against Sarah's breast. "Oh my God," he breathed. "Sarah, they're incredible. You're incredible. I can't believe you did this." Carefully, he reached out to stroke a feather-light finger across one tiny brow. A pair of hazy blue eyes fluttered open at his touch, unfocused but achingly perfect. "I know we only picked out one name," Sarah murmured, "since someone wanted to be surprised." "In my defense, I was only expecting one surprise," Jack joked weakly. He couldn't seem to tear his eyes away from the miniature miracles in Sarah's arms. Well, now we need to come up with another one. I was thinking William after your grandpa, and maybe Noah, since he came to us like his biblical namesake, on a wave we never saw coming. William and Noah, Jack whispered in wonder. Those are great names. Perfect names. God, I love you so much. Thank you for this, for not giving up on us. Tears welled in his eyes as he leaned in to kiss Sarah softly. She tasted like sweat and salt and the promise of a new beginning. When they parted, Sarah smiled up at him tremulously. Thank you for fighting for me, for our family. I'm just so sorry Jack cut her off with another gentle kiss. No more sorries, he murmured against her lips. We're done with that now. The past is in the past. Right now, I just want to enjoy the present and the two unbelievable gifts you gave me today. He gazed down in awe at William and Noah, marveling at the way they fit so perfectly in the circle of Sarah's arms. He thought his heart might burst from the sheer force of love and joy and protectiveness that swelled within his chest. Just then, a soft knock sounded at the door. It opened a crack, and Veronica's beaming face appeared. "Can Auntie V come in and get some baby snuggles?" she stage whispered. "And there's a very excited big sister out here, too." Jack shot Sarah a questioning look, and she nodded, smiling. "Let them in. It's time for this family to be together." The door burst open, and Emily rocketed into the room, all excited squeals and wild pigtails. She scrambled onto the foot of the bed and gazed raptly at her new brothers, while Veronica perched beside her. "They look like raisins!" Emily announced gleefully. Jack snorted, while Sarah giggled and made the obligatory noises about them being the most beautiful raisins ever. Jack sat back and drank in the sight of the people he loved most in this world, his heart so full it felt like it might shatter from the strain of holding so much happiness. His eyes met Sarah's over their children's heads, and he saw his own incandescent wonder and gratitude reflected back at him. After all the struggles and heartache and misunderstandings, they had made it here, together. As an unexpected upwelling of emotion clogged his throat, Jack finally allowed the tears to slip free. They were tears of disbelieving joy, of soul-deep thankfulness for the miraculous detours life had thrown his way. To think, it had all started with one little girl's uncanny observation, a seemingly innocent mistake that had snowballed into the most devastating challenge of his life, only to lead him to the greatest gifts he could have ever imagined. The universe worked in mysterious ways, but sitting there in that hospital room, surrounded by the laughter and chaos of his pieced-together family, Jack knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't change a damn thing, not for all the lost pictures in the world.